Hello, I'm Chris Lemley. You and I will share a rare opportunity to hear Edward Charles Bassett, architect and general partner of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. He will express his thoughts and feelings about our new City Hall. Imagine, well over a century ago, our community was experiencing similar interest, excitement, concerns about budget, the desire for their architect to interpret for the county an edifice that would be functional for their current needs, represent the spirit of the community, and that it would be something fine, something lasting, something that we can be proud of for future generations. Wouldn't it have been rewarding to have had the chance to have on record that architect's expressions about our community courthouse, our community itself, and the life of the times? Our City Hall, designed by Mr. Bassett, has all of these attributes of the Columbus tradition set by those who had the foresight to plan intelligently for the future. More than a century later, we have had another stimulating challenge for a dignified governmental building. One, to select an architect to interpret through his design a statement to reflect the citizens of Columbus, their quality of self-government, and their pursuit of excellence. Mr. Bassett, who has designed projects in Russia, Hawaii, Argentina, California, Texas, Minneapolis, to name a few, and now in Columbus, Indiana. With great pleasure, I introduce you to Charles Bassett. Mr. Bassett, what influenced you to become an architect?
I can't remember having had any alternative. My father was an architect, and I was raised under a drafting board, so to speak. My first, outside of the usual process of cutting neighbors' lawns, my first real job was office boy and blueprint boy in my father's office as a youngster. And by the time I was in high school, I guess I'd reached a point where I could do some rudimentary drafting and do lettering and put dates on drawings. And I can't remember ever seriously entertaining any other alternative vocation, except perhaps the sea. My father's brothers all went to sea except for him. So I guess there was that latent thing way in the back of my mind. I could have been a happy sailor, I think.
Did you grow up in San Francisco?
No, I grew up in Port Huron, Michigan, which is the same kind of country as this, right across from the Canadian border. And a town that I think when I was growing up was about the same size as Columbus is now.
Did your father have an architectural specialty?
No, he was a small town practitioner. He did houses and small commercial buildings, churches, schools. Had a nice casual relationship with a close friend who was an architect in Sarnia, Ontario, and circumstances were much more easy in those days, and they bootlegged work back and forth across the border because we all had so many friends on either side. So the Canadian architect would often get a job in our side, and my dad would have work over there, and how it was all accomplished was very quietly handled.
Who was the principal individual that influenced you, would you say? Your dad obviously had a great influence on you.
Yeah, well, I guess it was the experience of being in Arrow's office, because it was my first real job. I'd worked for several architects before that, very able people, especially a gentleman named Alden Dow, who's well known and practices in Midland, Michigan. I was there for almost a year. Prior to starting my work on my graduate degree at Cranbrook elder Saarinen, and I think the condition at Arrow's office for that 5.5 years was probably the most important single factor as an influence.
How about the elder Saarinen? Would you consider him a visionary and architect?
No, I would not consider him a visionary at all. I would consider him as one of the last of the great traditional architects, and not a modern. I think his building that got him fame in this country, which was his entry in the Tribune competition in Chicago, was a very, very beautiful building. It had certain Gothic overtones and a certain spirit about it, which certainly were not contemporary in the sense that we think of contemporary architecture, which is to say, in those days, international style. One simply has to look at his entry and compare it to the one that Walter Gropius had to understand that. No, I think he was a wonderful traditional architect.
I guess the thing that we relate to most, his work here, is the First Christian Church.
Yes.
And for that reason, it deviated from traditional church architecture at the time.
Well, I mean but if you look at that church in terms of its peers and its immediate predecessors in various parts of Europe, particularly in Northern Europe, you can understand that building and where it came from and how it came from him. There are all the elements that are in that building were in other buildings that he'd done before. And it stands, I think, from my point of view, still the nicest building in town. It has a splendid scale and detail and a nice and surprising austerity when you go inside.
It does.
And I like that very much.
Oh, do you think that architectural group was influenced at all by Frank Lloyd Wright?
When you say group,
oh, the Saarinen group and the Bauhaus.
No. I think that there was a lot of Wright influence in parts of Northern Europe, particularly Germany and Holland. There was very little that I could ever see in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland.
But we see those similar fixtures, those deep urns on the exterior of many buildings, the tall doors, and Frank Lloyd Wright used so many of those.
Yeah, but there were mannerisms that weren't Wright's. There were mannerisms which were natural to most architecture at that time, and used by many architects. I mean, the urn condition is a true Art Deco situation. And if you look at a catalog, I think you're talking about the very flat,
yes,
very wide, narrow bottom condition. That if you look at the catalog of the 1925 fair of art and decoration that occurred in Paris, and that which was a springboard for Corbeau and a lot of people were there, that stuff was very common. And,
so it existed throughout the world of architecture.
Much of the things that one looks at Wright and says that's Wrightian are not in that sense at all. They're Art Deco and Art Nouveau items often because Wright was all of those things at the same time.
Yes.
He was not 100% original. He was a very strong, inspired designer who used the conditions of his time in his graphics and in his decorative items. He used them freely. Just took them in as his own.
I guess that's why we feel sometimes that
right.
those are strictly his. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Have you changed your design philosophy since your student days?
Well, I hope so. If I haven't, I got a serious problem.
What about since your first professional commissions?
Well, yes, too. One hopefully grows. I think when you start out as a youngster, that you know everything there is to know, and you're very arrogant. I think that's natural. And as the older you get, the less you know. And that's absolutely true. I think everything's important when you're young. and you don't want to give an inch anywhere on anything. You're so passionate and intense about it, and you have no sense of importances, priorities. Buildings have the same problem as everything else does. Everybody can't be on first base, as they say, and when you're facing a complex building, and even the smallest building can be quite complex, you have to make a series of decisions. Often it's a series of compromises, because architecture of all arts is the most social. It's the one art that deals in almost every aspect of our culture, inescapably. I mean, you can always paint a painting. You can do it by yourself in your studio, and all you need is the paints, the canvas, and the brush. And the culture has no other input except as you decide. But that's true in architecture. The economy and the political situation, the cultural mores of the moment, the styles of the moment, all impinge on you. And you can't have everything all the time. So when a building comes along, you're constantly being asked to say, yes, I'd much rather have this than that. And if I have to give up something, I want to give up this and not that. And I really need that because the building will fail. And you give this away. Or you play another game, which is really, I'm full of platitudes today. You're simply saving one's ammunition for the important issues that make the building succeed. And you don't use it all up on things which are not really essential to its success.
What do you consider the most important issues in a building, for example?
It's the survival of its idea. And of course, the City Hall here had some, as you know, some severe cost problems. The dollar has had a lot happen to it in the last 10 years. The peculiar situation of building something in Columbus has its own effect. They sort of...
Why do you say peculiar situation?
Well, because I think that there's what I would call the Columbus factor, which makes buildings automatically expensive, more expensive here. And I think that's probably been discussed before, but it is a true thing. And so when the building's price came in, we were very surprised because we were aware of what was happening generally everywhere in the country as far as architectural costs, and it came in much higher than we expected. We had to take a lot of money out. Well, I took it out in most cases in materials. I lost some details. But for example, the great entrance walk and step system, those walls, that was originally all to been in limestone, the same as the plinth or base course of the building. I wanted that very much. That was something that the long hall would have been far more beautiful and rich in the way the building aged. And the low walls that ran along the lawn, along Second and along Washington, they were to be limestone also. And I lost a lot of things like that.
What are some other compromises that you
Well, I don't. There was a limestone went in to the lower Galleria, and I had a lot of good, sort of healthy wood trim that would protect surfaces and plaster walls and stuff, generally in the office spaces, so that the building would cost a little bit at the front end, more at the front end, and last longer, in a sense, as far as maintenance was concerned. And it just became obvious that we couldn't do this. The city, and I think very appropriately, and I feel very good about the fact that they could do this and that we were able to find a way to have the building adjust, built that building without any bond issue or anything. And that's in these days and times, that's a very magic thing. And that probably should take precedent. I guess just to finish this one point, the idea is that the steps, their width and their importance and the strength of that diagonal coming down to the corner and rising from the corner up to the court of the building is the important thing. What you make it out of is important but less important. See, so I had the choice of having much smaller steps made out of limestone.
Yes.
Or having something that was the right scale made out of concrete. So that's the kind of condition which occurs time and time again when one is doing buildings.
What about that first design dream? What happened when it became a reality? Your first real building?
Well, let me see. I guess that my own building.
Your own building.
Well, I guess that was probably
the
the little industrial indemnity building in San Francisco, and just through a nice series of factors, it was a building in which the client and what I wanted to do coincided very well, and that the dollar had not fallen apart yet, and one got a dollar for a dollar spent, and I had a very specific, strong idea and an attitude about the building, which really had to do with it being like any really fine material, getting better as it got older. That's the way I would like all buildings I'm related to do, but that isn't quite possible anymore. But anyway, that building, I guess in that sense, is still my favorite, because it's as good now as when it was built 25 years ago, and at least as good, if not better. And the people who own it love it, and as a matter of fact, the people who own it bought it from the original builder because they had loved it so long, and when it came on the market, they leaped at it, and so that makes me very happy. And I go by it all the time, and they maintain it well. Obviously, there's a relationship.
Yes.
And that's
yes.
the nicest thing that can happen. Yeah.
Oh, yes. That's a total architectural achievement,
right.
wouldn't you say? How do you think that buildings affect the people that use them?
Well, that's a dangerous question. I think there are some people who are affected by their visual surroundings, and architecture is part of that, and so they're affected by the architecture. And they love the fall color, and they make the effort to go to museums to see paintings. And if there's a book on art on a shelf, they'll take it off and look at it. There are many other people who don't do any of those things. And
do you think sometimes that we're affected and are unaware
well,
that we're being affected by that space because it's beautiful? For example, in the City Hall this morning, I was standing there and feeling, it made me feel elegant to be in that space.
I would like to believe that.
It's so beautiful, the textures and the use of materials and just every visual aspect of that building, and the textures, the feeling of the railings, walking through that space and looking out at its landscape. The totality of the building makes one feel a certain way when one is inside.
You're saying all the right things. That makes me very happy. But I can't guarantee that everyone's like you. I think if somehow that building, in whatever way, whether it's conscious or subconsciously, becomes a part of everyone's life in this town, then as far as I'm concerned, the building would have succeeded. I do like, and I think that was probably my primary goal as an overlay to the simple design problem, and its achievement was that I really wanted the building, which by its nature and quality became a part of the affections of the community.
I think it has already.
I don't know how to convert that to an overt. I mean, like they say, oh boy, aren't those great materials, or something like that. It's just that it settles in, and by its presence and dignity and other qualities becomes a part of them. And if that happens, great.
I think
I couldn't be happier.
Certainly has begun to
That's nice.
fill that role, for sure.
All right.
How did you select the site?
The site was one of several that were available. And there was one further out, or in, I guess, on Second, closer to the river. And we chose the one that was at the bottom of Washington, because we felt that Washington, even though it's seen better years, is still the main street, and that a building at the bottom of it, and therefore as close as possible to the county courthouse, was the place for it to be. Realizing all the time that the site was rather awkward because it was still to the side, that Washington comes zapping down through town and then goes off into the floodplain on the other side of those trees. And I guess that if architects were in charge of their destiny in another time, we would have, I would have taken Myron's building, the Republic building, moved it over a half a block, closed off Washington after it crossed Second, and then put the building at the bottom of Washington Street. So when you came down, there it was.
Yes.
I mean, that's the way it would have been done not so many years ago. But given the situation, we decided that that was the best possible site that we had to work with, and we should try that.
It seems as though it just belongs there, really.
Well,
how did you select the triangular shape?
By virtue of that problem, we have the presence of the Republic building, which is an elegant single-story structure set quite a ways back from the property line on Second, and then we have the Lincoln School, which was further down on the opposite side of the street behind the Victorian commercial architecture of Washington, and then we had what could be described as a slightly tenuous relationship with the county courthouse, and we discovered that if we drew a diagonal line virtually from the Republic to the Lincoln School, that we suddenly could make a community out of some buildings that otherwise would just sort of be standing in the normal manner, normal way, sort of by themselves, without specifically relating. And the fact that a 45-degree angle brought our new building, the Republic, the park condition that really runs across the front of the Republic, and the Lincoln School into the act simultaneously seemed to be the right thing to do. And the automatic axis normal to that 45 degrees is one that went toward the county courthouse. And if we sighted carefully, the line went behind the county courthouse and ended up at the side entrance to the commons. So we thought, well, there's something that has urban potential occurring here, and there's some further thoughts about what might happen over there. I would like, very frankly, to plant that police building out, which is one of the really ugly buildings in the municipality, with Lombardy poplars spaced in the French manner about 5 feet apart, so you could not see that building. And then I'd like to have a diagonal walk that went between that building through the poplars and behind the county courthouse, and picked up the side entrance of the commons. And I think that could be a very beautiful situation, and would take the landscape condition and extend it from the city hall into the county property. I know I'm sort of probably infringing on other people's at least provinces in this case. But this has been discussed, and I would like to somehow find a way to have it succeed.
Well, there would be such...
Yeah. The other thing I want to add, too, is that by virtue of recognizing the Lincoln School so appropriately, that would be just exert that much more leverage to the necessity of saving it.
What about the maintenance and preservation of buildings?
Well, it's very important, and it's particularly at this time, I have we spoke about this briefly before, but I have a feeling that the world is being taken over by the Harvard Business School, and I find it a truly frightening condition that all by the relationships I have in business, so many of them now are strictly fast turnover, bottom line results, to turning a profit and showing a profit and looking big on the big board. And this one compounded by inflation and escalation of costs, and the change in relationship which has occurred between goods and labor, particularly in municipal governments. The amount of money that's available to maintain the plant, our physical plant of the whole city, or any part of us. And I suppose that all of us are feeling that very much ourselves, even maintaining our own home. That if you can put things off because you have so many immediate concerns and expenditures, you put it off. So every year when the budget comes around, a budget item comes up for the maintenance of the city parks or the roads or the new city hall, there's someone going to say, well, you know, we really don't have to do that this year. I think it's going to last another year. We'll put it off. And then next year, someone else builds another rationalization. And then the buildings, a building's no different than you or me. We have to find ways to maintain ourselves. And we have to spend money on maintaining ourselves. We do it with our car. We do it with other parts of our life. But there's something about a building which, simply because it's made of brick and mortar and stuff, and because it doesn't talk back, that you take advantage of it. And I think that those buildings which have survived well have been, almost without exception, those buildings which have been maintained well. And I have no idea what this little city hall has in its future, but I would hope that it has a concierge of some type who looks very closely at items and says, no, we got to do this. No, you can't do that. Yeah, because public buildings, it's an interesting quality about public buildings. They're owned by everybody, but nobody loves them. They're a stepchild. Everybody who has anything to do with them has their own problems with their own home, or. And public buildings are very frequently stepchildren by virtue of that.
But there's such a responsibility there.
I mean, as soon as we build something, we have a responsibility. You know?
Indeed.
Yeah.
It's a comment on our society.
That's right. Well, who's that kind of wonderful off-the-wall philosopher in the West Coast? Eric Hoffer?
Yes.
Eric Hoffer?
Yes.
He had an interesting premise, which I don't know what's true or not, but it's because I'm an architect and we're talking, and I worry about the things you and I are talking about. He had a strong philosophical premise that the index of the health of any culture really was immediately discernible in how they maintain themselves. And when you saw a culture which was not maintaining itself, then you were also looking at a culture that was having problems. And
what an amazing insight.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's
Yes,
true.
it's certainly food for thought, isn't it?
It's scary.
What about the art in public spaces? How important is that to a building for the total look and feeling and attitude?
Excuse me. I think there are almost as many answers to that question as there are instances where art might be introduced. I've had, I must say, a very mixed success on this condition, because at its most obvious and mundane level, and it happens all the time in commercial architecture, where it's the architect, and our firm has been very successful at this, and the communities also, where it becomes very important that there be some art introduced, and it becomes almost a gestural thing. And in the case of a private builder, it's his way of buying his way into heaven, you know, along the cultural avenue, and making his peace with the community. I think that it can be so successful and it can be such a failure. One of the outstanding things in this country happens to be right here in Columbus, and that is, I think the wonderful Moore in front of the library is one of the great examples and rare examples of the success of modern art used sensitively in an important architectural space. And if you made me give you 4 more examples, I'd be very hard pressed. The little court in the library, I think requires something to occupy it permanently. And I think there's work afoot to do something there, and I think that would be appropriate. And some other things that we're, as you know, working on as far as the inside is concerned. I tend to back off a little bit personally, because art's very important to me. I spend a lot of attention and a great deal of whatever monies I have on art. So therefore, I do make a very personal and important commitment to it myself. On the other hand, I think it's very hard to deal in art and not have your own personal tastes sort of take over. And I don't think there's any place for my personal tastes in the Columbus situation as far as art is concerned. I'm willing to say, gee, I think that's great, or, well, I'm not sure about that, but I think it would be presumptive, if not arrogant, if I was a prime mover in what it was finally that was placed in that court or in that building. On the other hand, I think there are buildings that have been built many years ago in which somehow nice paintings have gotten in there. They were contemporary and a part of their time, and they've become part of the building, and they're wonderful, and they're a nice surprise. They are me, because I love paintings.
Yes.
I know lots of painting people who, if every painting in the world went away tomorrow, they wouldn't know it. You'd have to tell them that they disappeared. So I don't know how to. That's right. I think architecture, when it succeeds, is architecture, and it is an art, and therefore other arts laid on it, I think, are to everyone's benefit.
Yes.
You know?
You've done such a wonderful job of interpreting an attitude of a community, making its statement through that building. I think anyone coming to Columbus can look at that building and say, this is a public building. It is a statement about Columbus and the quality of life that exists.
Well, I wanted that. Office buildings are so much a part of our life now, and all the things that go on in city halls nowadays are so much office-like,
Yes.
where we're really Xeroxing each other and transferring each other back and forth across our desks. That the whole communication paper thing is sort of taking over, and most city halls being built today are nothing but office buildings, and they look like nothing but office
Yes.
buildings, and they have that sort of that anonymous non-engagement quality about them, of not really being anything but simply a building which is a vehicle to hold a Xerox machine. And then I guess maybe I'm just old enough to have other memories, and having come from a town similar with a nice brick courthouse and a nice lawn, and the flowers are on the flagpole, and all the damn things that make it nice, I felt it had to happen. Yes. And so we've manipulated our design, as you can see, because these things, I think, are very critical. The seat of government, such as it is in a small town, should be dignified. Presumably the decisions, therefore, that are made in it will be more dignified, and that the building should represent the very best aspects of our culture and our community, and I think it should have a presence. As you say, you should look at it and say, yes, you wouldn't buy a used car there. You wouldn't go and get some aspirin. That's a place of government. And if you can do that, and do it in a friendly way and not in a put-off way, then, I mean, that's what that was all about.
Columbus City Hall makes that statement.
Thank you.
It truly does. Thank you.
Yeah.